This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
It's 18 years since September 9/11, and despite extensive international efforts against global terrorism, the threat of terror is spreading in Africa. We find out why. And the first batch of over 600 Nigerians living in South Africa embark on a journey back home. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I am Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. In business, Ghana introduces new regulations to avoid a costly cleanup of its banking sector. And in sports, South African motor racing team Toyota Gazoo recruit former Formula One champ Fernando Alonso in a bid to retain Dakar title. Welcome to Africa Live once again. 18 years ago, Al-Qaeda launched a series of 4 coordinated attacks on the U.S. From that day on, 9/11 was no longer simply a date on the calendar, but a reminder of the shocking attack. Nearly 3,000 people were killed and 4 hijacked planes targeted New York's Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and a field in Pennsylvania. The highest number of casualties came from the attack on New York City's Twin Towers. The attack not only rattled the world, but caused the U.S. to launch a global campaign against terrorism, as well as commemorating the anniversary of the attacks. Today also marks World Terrorism Day. From Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Boko Haram in Nigeria, to ISIL, the world continues the battle, the threat posed by militant groups. Well, Somalia is perhaps one of the countries in Africa battling the rising threats of terrorism. Al-Qaeda and ISIL militants are battling for control of the Horn of African nation and have claimed thousands of lives in a decade-long insurgency. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo has more from Mogadishu.
In January, an aerial strike in southern Somalia claimed more than 50 lives, the single deadliest attack by American drones against Al-Shabaab targets in the Horn of African nation so far this year. The strike took place some 50 kilometers north of Kismayo in response to an attack by the group against local Somali forces. Since then, the strikes have increased, targeting Al-Shabaab and a pro-ISIL faction based in the northern regions of Somalia.
Air strikes that are occurring in the country means a lot in terms of limiting the movement of Al-Shabaab on the ground and also the frequency of movement. But they do not mean actually in terms of reducing the number of attacks they have carried out, looking at the number of attacks they have been carrying out in the last 10 years.
Despite the increased air campaign, Al-Shabaab was able to launch a deadly siege on this popular hotel in the port city of Kismayo in June, killing 26 people. The first complex attack by the group since it lost control of the strategic port city 7 years ago. And in August, a female suicide bomber detonated explosives at a security gathering chaired by the mayor of Mogadishu. The attack killed 13 people, including the mayor of Mogadishu. The killing of Abdurrahman Omar Osman is perhaps one of Al-Shabaab's most high-profile attacks in recent years. It's an attack that has once again put to light the group's ever-increasing tactics against some of its high-profile targets in the country.
They're still effective due to the findings that they have and the large territory they have and the lack of the attacks towards them coming at the moment in the country. The level of the threat they have in the country can be measured in terms of the recent attack they have carried in Mogadishu, in the office of the mayor of Mogadishu, that they had the capacity to do a large explosion by using a female bomber that happened in the office of the mayor of Mogadishu.
Meanwhile, despite coordinated efforts to weaken the militant group, Al-Shabaab has been ranked the deadliest terrorist group in the African continent. The national army has begun making advances in areas perceived as the militant strongholds. These US-trained forces have also managed to capture and hold strategic towns in rural areas from which the group used as a launching pad to attack government forces and African Union troops while on the move. Abdulaziz Billo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Well, for more on this, we are joined by Roy Okediev, a security consultant and a retired military officer in Lagos, and Dr. Hassan Kanenje, director of the Horn Institute here in Nairobi. We will start with you, Doctor, since you're in the studio. Thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. First things first, let's start with the problem, the extremist problem of terrorism in South Africa. From your perspective, how do you see it?
Unfortunately, since September 11, the problem of extremism and terrorism has actually only grown, and especially in the Horn of Africa, and of course also in West Africa. The Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab have been very active, and they've turned into these theaters of the activities. So it's a little bit unfortunate that 18 years later, we're still talking about terror.
Okay. I just want to get our colleague, Roy Okidievbi. He is in Lagos, a former military officer, so he should know a lot about security. My next question is for you, Roy. The terror threat is expanding beyond the Sahel towards the coastal countries. What is fueling this rise in insecurity? Roy.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to say more work, and more work. More work on the part of the security agencies in the African countries. They need to build more trust among the citizens of the countries where they operate. They need to generate more people-friendly intelligence, people-friendly approaches, because these terrorist groups, they generate their cells within the people. They pass through the roads we pass through. They transfer funds and financial activities. They buy foods and other things. So they need more relationship with the people. They need to generate more intelligence for action points. And on the part of the other African countries relating with sister countries, I will advise that we should have more seminars between agencies, sharing ideas, sharing experiences. We should have more sessions between countries, agencies, having intelligence exchange and building trust among themselves so they can begin to nip these issues at the bud.
All right, Roy, well said. I'd like you just to stay on the line. We'll get right back to you. Let's talk to the doctor. Let's bring the doctor back into the conversation. Well, doctor, for those who say that the situation in Kenya and Somalia will not quickly change as far as Al-Shabaab is concerned, to that you say what?
I would say it's partly true. In part because the situation cannot change dramatically if the conditions that create and perpetuate the problem of terror and extremism are still apparent. For instance, root causes need to be addressed. The presence of foreign fighters, national, regional, and foreign policies have to be, or rather, policies against terrorism have to be coordinated. Domestication of these strategies, I think, is important to reflect the realities of those countries involved, especially in the Horn of Africa. It's a difficult problem to deal with, given, for instance, today we still have the state of Somalia trying to put itself together. So the presence of ungoverned spaces allows this group actually to thrive. And unless this problem is fixed, we are able to stabilize Somalia, for instance, and get rid of some of the underlying causes of terrorism and extremism, I think it's likely to drag on for some time to come.
All right, doctor. Let's move over back to you, Roy. This question is right back for you. Since 9/11, Roy, there has been extensive, and I do mean extensive, international efforts against global terrorism. But why are counterterrorism measures in Africa, and particularly West Africa, not bearing much fruit? Roy?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. You see, the African continent as it is has not captured the interest of the citizens as we see it. You know, the African continent need to look inward. The African continent need to bring government policies that are people friendly. The African continent need to look at all the countries under the continent coming together to understand that this is a global threat, and there is a solution that is system-based purely for Africa, because we have our peculiar challenges, we have our peculiar environment, And it's an advisory that all African countries must begin to look at correlation. They must begin to look at border control. They must begin to look at jurisdictional activities that will encourage exposing terrorist activities, financial control within countries. And the presidents of all African countries must see themselves as one when it comes to providing governance, especially governance that are people-friendly. This is my advice.
All right, Roy Oki DFB, former military officer, thank you so much for your insight and analysis. And Dr. Kanenje, thank you for taking time to join us here on Africa Live. And again, thank you for breaking it all down for us. Moving on, well, the first plane loaded with Nigerian nationals has left South Africa. This is after more than 10 days of xenophobic violence, intimidation, arson, and looting. 12 people were killed in the Gauteng area. CGTN's Angelo Coppola has more from OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg.
The flight carried an estimated 300 people, and passengers were mostly made up of families with kids who had either suffered directly from xenophobic attacks or felt their lives and livelihoods under threat. While the South African government has classified the xenophobia as simply criminal activity, the foreign nationals who experienced the actual attacks and that we spoke to said the violence, looting and arson was aimed directly at them.
As a reverend, then destroy my church, then took away all the instruments there. So I have nothing, let me go home. No place like home, so that I can build up my life again. They hit me the first time. If I bring the cameras, you will see the blood over me. They attack me in the church and they destroy everything.
Meanwhile, the country's police minister says that their intelligence gathering capacity had been hollowed out in recent years and they didn't have prior knowledge of the widespread violence. Police have since increased patrols in the hotspots in an attempt to preempt any more violence. We do understand that some 800 people have been arrested for related crimes. There were also a confirmed death toll of 12 people, 2 of which were foreign nationals. The second plane, of course, is due to leave OR Tambo International on Thursday with another 300 people on board. That's provided that all their documentation is in order. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, Mozambique and Zimbabwe now say they will also repatriate their citizens from South Africa to Zimbabweans were among those killed in the xenophobic attacks last week. Local newspapers, the Herald, is reporting that while addressing cabinet on Tuesday, Zimbabwe's Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services Minister announced that government will be evacuating at least, listen to this, 171 Zimbabwean nationals out of South Africa. CGTN's Farai Wakatuya joins us now with the latest from Harare. Farai, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Farai, what can you tell us? What more can you tell us about the details of this event?
Well, Richard, indeed, 2 people, 2 Zimbabwe nationals have been confirmed dead as a result of that violence, and 171 have approached the consulate in South Africa requesting assistance in terms of being evacuated, voluntarily evacuated from South Africa so they can return home and flee that violence. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs also says it's continuing to monitor the situation in case it does escalate so it can step up and provide more assistance to those who need to be evacuated. It's working with NGOs and development agencies that are involved in terms of migration and also ensuring that those who need a safe haven or need to go into secure locations are able to do so they can get the protection that they do require. So far 171 people have requested to be brought back home, and should more need that assistance, the government says it is ready to urgently provide it. Richard.
All right, Farai, thank you for that update and report. Don't you go away. We'll be right back with you with more questions about our next story. Meanwhile, the body of former Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe is due to arrive from Singapore on Wednesday. The body will lay in state for 3 days at 2 different stadiums in Harare. A state funeral for the late leader will be held on Saturday. It is still unclear where Mugabe will be buried on Sunday. Mugabe's family is pushing back against the government's plan to bury him at the National Heroes Acre Monument in the Zimbabwe capital. They want him to be buried in his home village in Kutama, west of the capital. All right, Farai, it's right back to you. We know that the body of Robert Mugabe is being flown home from Singapore today. Can you take us through the day's activities and what happens when the body arrives?
Well, Richard, the body is indeed expected in about 3 hours from now, 3 p.m. local time. Over state media and on various news outlets, people have been invited to come to the Robert Mugabe International Airport this afternoon to welcome back that body. So once his body does get here, it will go to his residence here in the capital, Harare, commonly referred to as the Blue Roof. That is where the funeral wake is taking place in Harare. There's another funeral wake in his rural village, but for now his body will go to his home here in Harare, because tomorrow and Friday there is a public ceremony, a public opportunity for Zimbabweans from all the provinces of the country to go to a stadium in Harare where they'll be able to pay their last respects to him. As you quite rightly said, state funeral on Saturday and then burial on Sunday. So when the body arrives today, we expect that there'll be a large crowd gathered to welcome it, including government officials, and then thereafter it will go to his private residence ahead of the public farewell and opportunity for people to pay their respects on Thursday and Friday.
Well, Fry, thank you so much for clearing that up. My final question to you is about the fact that there were reports of disagreements between his family and the government. Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, indeed, we understand that, the government, obviously, when someone is accorded national hero status, they receive the state funeral. They are normally have their body interred at the National Heroes Shrine that is reserved for Liberation War heroes. But as we understand it, the Mugabe family would like the former president to be buried in his rural village. So at this point in time, it's not clear where he'll be buried. And I think that is where this confusion is coming through, where the government would like to activate its own systems where it carries out this hero status, buries him at the hero's burial ground, but the family has its own, requests and would like to carry out the burial in its own way. So at this point in time, we have no clarity. Yesterday, when the Ministry of Information gave a briefing, all they did say was that the burial would still go ahead on Sunday, but said more details in terms of where he'll be buried will be provided today. We hope that once, the body returns, once the former First Lady, Robert Mugabe's wife, is back in the country, because she's a key stakeholder in this, that she may also, once consultations are done with her as well on the ground, will then be able to get clarity in terms of where the burial will take place. But as it stands, not yet sure where, but we do know that a state funeral where other heads of state have been invited, dignitaries, diplomats, and foreign guests have been invited, is taking place on Saturday, burial on Sunday. Hopefully we will know at some point where that's happening.
All right, Farai Wakatuya, thank you for bringing us that story. Excellent reporting. Thank you once again for that update and report. You are watching Africa Live on CGTN. We've got a lot more news coming your way after the break. Let's take a look at the headlines. Rwanda agrees on a deal to take in hundreds of African migrants. And in Kenya, worsening drought puts millions at risk of starvation.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Hong Kong protesters canceled demonstrations on Wednesday to mark the September 11, 2001 attacks in New York. Hong Kong has been rocked by months of sometimes violent unrest. On Wednesday, Ivan Lam, activist and head of the political party Demosisto, was sentenced in court in relation to a 2016 rally. He was earlier charged with inciting unauthorized assembly outside the central government's liaison office in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, Chief Executive Carrie Lam spoke to investors at a Belt and Road forum, saying the region would be able to bounce back from months of protests.
My fervent hope is that we can bridge our divide by steadfastly upholding the one country, two systems principle and the basic law. And through the concerted efforts of the government and the people of Hong Kong, we can find our way back to recent discussion, to the social stability essential to the long-term stability and prosperity and well-being of us all. I'm confident we can do just that.
The United Nations has announced that hundreds of African refugees trapped in Libyan detention centers will be evacuated to Rwanda within the next few weeks. This is part of increasingly urgent efforts to relocate people as conflict rages in the North African nation. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala has more.
Libya is a transit country for thousands of African migrants trying to reach Europe. Many who have been unsuccessful in their journey have been trapped in detention centers here. The European Union and the UN Refugee Agency have been working to evacuate them.
This morning in Addis Ababa, UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, with the government of Rwanda and the African Union, we have signed an MOU and a memorandum of understanding to set up a transit mechanism for evacuating refugees out of Libya. Under this agreement, the government of Rwanda will receive and provide protection to refugees and asylum seekers who are currently being held in detention centers in Libya.
Under the Rwandan deal, refugees will be airlifted to Rwanda in groups of about 50.
Rwanda will give enough time for this process, for these refugees to be given the opportunity to be resettled in European countries, or to be given the opportunity of going back to their countries of origin if they think it is safe for them to go back, or even an African country they want to settle in. So the options also are open, and they have many options, and they have even the option, if they want to settle in Rwanda, they can request it through the authorities of Rwanda.
We are saying that we are ready to receive the initial batch of 500, as Commissioner said. Though the MOU covers 3,000, but Rwanda will receive 500 at a time, such that we can have enough time to prepare for them, and even our partners and under the leadership of the AU can come and follow up and make sure that things are as they are supposed to be.
Evacuation is on a voluntary basis, and priority will be given to the most vulnerable, such as unaccompanied children, disabled people, and the elderly. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Kenya's drought and food security situation continues to deteriorate. According to the latest figures from the country's National Drought Management Authority, 2.6 million people are currently facing acute food shortages. From Turkana, one of the worst affected regions, CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy has this report.
Kenya faces a new humanitarian crisis with 2.6 million people reportedly threatened by severe hunger. Those in need of relief assistance has more than doubled from 1.1 million in February this year, with the number expected to rise above 3 million people by October. At least 11 counties have been affected as the drought and hunger situation gets worse. Selina Aripon is a 25-year-old mother of 4 and a resident of Akwanya village in Lodwar. Her family is among thousands of people currently trying to cope with the devastating effects of climate change. Sitting in the shade of a tree with her family, Aripon struggles to weave brooms to make ends meet. Aripon earns less than $1 for a day's work, laboring for her children's survival. Much of our proceeds is spent on food and other necessities for our family.
I try my best to buy food for my children out of what I earn. I also use part of my savings as hospital bills when my children get sick, pay school fees and also buy some clothes for myself.
A few kilometers from Akwanya, a group of 30 women have come together under the Kakwanyang Women Group to save money for emergencies and basic needs in an attempt to avert the devastating effects of the raging hunger. But these women can only do so much.
My role is to help them, or now they save this money. My role is to record them. My role is to teach them that this is the way to go with the business, the way to capture the anger.
This group of 30 women are the beacon of hope, not just in Kakwanyang, a community close to Lodwar town in Turkana County, but beyond. The largest saving this day was $9, but the women are free to take out loans from this pool, depending on their immediate needs. This is not just a dry spell. Between March and June, rainfall reached less than half the average rate. Many of these women have seen their harvests run down by delayed rains, rendering them helpless. The United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund's recent allocation of $5 million to complement Kenya's Hunger Safety Net program could bring a ray of hope to many, since it targets mainly parts of the arid and semi-arid regions of Kenya, which are hard hit by drought. Hundreds of thousands of people in Kenya's Turkana County remain in dire need of humanitarian assistance due to the prolonged drought that has left many in need of food. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Lodwar, Kenya.
A World Bank study shows that coastal erosion in Cote d'Ivoire is costing millions of dollars in lost revenue. It also threatens to cause immeasurable damage unless immediate action is taken. As CGTN's Tuli Shabalala reports, those suffering the most are the local coastal populations that are losing their homes, livelihoods, and even ancestral burial grounds. Let's take a look.
Residents of the town of Lahore Panda are painfully watching as remains of their ancestors drift out to sea from cemeteries. This is due to the unwavering coastal erosion going on in Cote d'Ivoire.
Today we live in anguish. What will happen tomorrow if no one comes to the aid of the village? We will disappear. But today it's our dead who are leaving. You know, in Africa, our parents and our ancestors are very important to us, and to see them scattered in the sea is heartbreaking. And every day that God brings to us, we are haunted.
The land in this area is receding at an average of 1 to 2 meters a year, and a loss of 10 meters over a period of just 2 days in 2011. This has posed a huge threat to the population.
We live here, but since the sea was threatening our home, we did not know what to do, so we took off and we went to the other side of the village.
Over the years, a hospital, police station and the regional school have all gone underwater.
The old city of Grand Lahore cannot be on the UNESCO's Natural Heritage List. It doesn't exist anymore. Some time back, they raised their alarm to see what could be done with part of the city. But all these historical buildings are now gone.
In its report, the World Bank says the West African nation is mostly affected by floods and coastal degradation. It calculated the economic cost to the country at $2 billion for 2017. Very little beyond carrying out studies has been done since then. The local population feels abandoned by the government.
What you need to do in the Grand Lahore is to plug the breach at the level of the cemetery, open up in front of Bandama River so that the water can then flow there, and put things in place dams so the water does not snake around, that the water instead goes straight into the sea. That is what needs to be done. That's all. It's feasible. Technically, it is feasible. It is just a question of costs.
In Abidjan, coastal erosion and climate change is threatening major economic infrastructures too. A United Nations environment expert says the Atlantic-facing African nations will need between 400 and 450 million US dollars to solve the coastal degradation problem. Many are in talks with the European Union and the African Development Bank to get funding. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
The Chinese Consulate General of Cape Town held a reception to celebrate China's Teachers' Day. The Chinese teachers from Confucius Institute across the country gathered on September the 10th to join in the festivities. Educators from various South African institutions were also present. Members of art groups for the Zhejiang Normal University in China were on hand to perform a variety of traditional arts. The launch of the Chinese Dream Scholarship was also launched at the event. The scholarship targets South African students studying the Chinese language and culture. Teachers' Day was created in 1985 by China's top legislative body, the National People's Congress. It aims to develop a tradition of respecting teachers and improving their status.
I think it showcased a Chinese language heart in South Africa. We wish all the Chinese teachers in Chinese consular area happy Teachers' Day.
Teachers today are on the spotlight, and the importance of the day is that children are taught to respect their teachers because teachers are already doing more.
Well, you're watching Africa Live on CGTN. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you chose to be right here with us, and we appreciate that. We've got your business news coming up next. Here's a look at the headlines. Coming up in business, Ghana introduces new regulations to avoid a costly cleanup of its banking sector. And billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates plans to invest in Nigeria's small-scale farmers.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back once again. The Bank of Ghana is strengthening its capacity to regulate lenders and avoid a repeat of a sector cleanup that cost the country more than $2.5 billion. The Apex Bank has hired more staff and acquired a new IT system to monitor compliance. Last month, the bank completed an overhaul of its financial sector that began in 2017. As a result, the number of lenders was trimmed down to 23, while second-tier lenders were cut down from 40 to 25. The Bank of Ghana also reduced microfinance and microcredit lenders to 168, a heavy cut from 554. Billionaire Bill Gates continues his quest to tackle poverty across Africa, this time looking at Nigeria. His foundation has announced that it will provide support for Nigerian smallholder farmers through innovations and investments. It will focus on creating a business climate to attract private sector investments as well as help farmers adapt to climate change. Gates Foundation has also funded Nigeria's agricultural sector in the past by boosting the production of farm produce to bring about food sufficiency. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is one of the largest private philanthropic organizations in the world. It prides itself in empowering African nations through health, agribusiness, and education. Well, about 100 Chinese manufacturers and suppliers are in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, for the China Trade Week. It's everything construction under one roof. The Big Five, as it's called, is attracting thousands of Nigerian businesses from across the country. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has more.
one of the largest construction exhibitions holding for the first time here. About 3,000 participants and entrepreneurs are exploring a wide range of options, from machinery to lighting and electrical appliances. Funding and maintaining standards are two major challenges facing Nigeria's construction industry, and this provides an opportunity to maintain standards and at the right price.
What Nigeria really needs is quality. I mean, when it comes to construction, all right, we need to improve in quality. Workmanship is usually not a problem here, but quality product. And you know, what we're doing here today provides the Nigerians with the opportunity to see new technologies and quality technologies, you know, to improve basically real estate. Okay, so this will help us to achieve that in terms of quality and availability of alternatives.
It's part of China's Belt and Road Initiative aimed at improving cooperation and ultimately scaling up businesses on both sides.
Our government have a good policy for one belt, one road. So, you know, we want to help the Nigeria young people, also Africa young people, to open the factory, and we will give around 10% discount for the machinery, and also we will offer our engineer to come here for installation and train our workers how to operate the machine.
Small and medium-scale businesses aren't left out. Manufacturers here say they're open to possibilities of partnership on various levels. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, Egypt is going to be the first in the Middle East and North Africa to store electricity. With Chinese partnership, the country will build a new power plant with the capacity to generate around 2,400 megawatts of electricity. Egypt is planning electrical connectivity projects with Sudan and Saudi Arabia. And as Adel El Maroui explains, the storage facility will help the country enhance its electrical power management. Let's take a look.
Egypt is going to be the first country in the region to have pumped storage power plant. The project will give the nation access to 2.4 gigawatts of clean electric energy. This advanced facility will be constructed in Ataqa Mountain in Suez City, not far from the Suez Canal industrial zone.
It's a huge project. It will introduce new technology to Egypt. The design of the project depends on the geographic nature of the location. It can't just be implemented anywhere. In Ataqa Mountain, there is a natural water reserve. There are only 2 countries in Africa who have similar technology. Egypt's project, however, is going to be the 4th biggest in the world.
The concept of hydroelectric storage is quite simple. Excessive electricity produced in the country would be used to power pumps, which would lift the water to a specific elevation. And then when needed, the water would be allowed to fall back down, turning turbines and producing additional electric power.
8 million cubic meters of water will be stored in the natural enclave of the mountain, all from recycled sewers water. China's Sinohydro has been entrusted with this $2.6 billion project, which is expected to be completed by the year 2026.
Sinohydro is a big company in that field. It's a state-owned company, so we have a lot of trust in it. The project is huge. It has 6 kilometers of tunnels, so safety and environmental impact are crucial. All our consultants have confidence that Sinohydro is a perfect fit for it.
Egypt's Hydropower Plant Executive Authority is currently finalizing its preliminary technical and geophysical studies for the Ataqa project. The government is also studying the feasibility to build 2 more pumped storage power plants to absorb the entire excessive electric power it has. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
As the trade war between China and the U.S. intensifies, Washington has been the first to draw up a list of items which it has excluded from tariffs imposed on Chinese goods. Now, Beijing has drawn up a similar exclusion list of its own to reduce the impact on Chinese companies. The list of American products which will be protected from Chinese countermeasures against the U.S. contains 16 different raw materials used by various industries. Let's take a look at that.
This is China's first batch of exclusive lists since the trade war was unleashed by President Trump. Their aim, to protect Chinese companies from becoming collateral damage in Beijing's retaliatory measures. The first lists include American raw materials crucial to companies' business activities, such as pesticide and shrimp seeds in agriculture, machine lubricants in manufacturing, and items in high-tech and medicine, such as raw materials used to manufacture cancer drugs.
5 out of the 16 items on the list are agricultural products. This time, we mainly targeted livestock breeding and cultivation industries, which have an increasing demand among Chinese consumers. These chosen products have heavily relied on imports from America as the single source, but the majority of our agricultural products could easily find substitutes elsewhere.
The items will be immune from China's retaliatory tariffs for 1 year. The State Council Custom Tariff Commission will even refund some of the tariffs already paid by businesses if they're eligible. Work is already underway on a second batch of lists, and companies have until mid-October to submit items for proposed inclusion. A third list is also in preparation. The Commission says the exclusion lists are meant to protect small businesses having difficulty sourcing substitute raw materials and to prevent grave economic loss or structural damage to key industries. 马克 CGTN.
Attention all tech lovers, Apple has unveiled new iPhones, Apple Watches, and an iPad at its annual launch event. CGTN's Wang Guan reports from California's Silicon Valley.
A faster chip, more battery life, and more color options. Apple has unveiled new models of smartphones, the iPhone 11 for $699, the iPhone 11 Pro selling for $999, and the iPhone 11 Pro Max priced at $1,099. The devices appear similar to the previous models, with the biggest change coming from an enhanced camera system. The triple camera design on the back includes an ultra-wide lens that can capture a panoramic view. The new cameras can also take what Apple described as the highest quality video in a smartphone.
This is the first phone that we've called Pro. And for us, that means it's a device that pros can count on to get their work done. But it's also a product for all of us who want simply the best product made, even if we're not a pro.
The incredible capabilities built into Apple Watch.
Apple has rolled out the next generation Apple Watch Series 5, which starts at $399 and features a new always-on Retina display, and the 7th generation iPad, which is priced at $329 and includes a bigger screen.
A key new feature of this year's iPhone is its enhanced photo-taking and video-taking capabilities. Some industry analysts point out this is partly because of strong competition coming from China.
I believe the emphasis on the camera, first, of course, it's under a lot of pressure from a lot of Chinese vendors who are putting a lot of innovation in the camera technology, imaging technology. At the same time, it's also a pretty good synergy between the other services that Apple wanted to bring into the Apple ecosystem.
In that ecosystem is Apple's new services. The company introduced Apple TV Plus, a new streaming service that could rival Netflix and Hulu, and Arcade, a new gaming service.
These are just a few of the exclusive originals from the exciting Apple TV Plus lineup. With Apple TV Plus, you'll get access to these and so many more, the best movies, comedies, dramas, and kids shows.
Some industry analysts predict that next year will be a big one to watch, as Apple, along with its global competitors, could be launching their first 5G smartphones. Wang Guan, CGTN, Cupertino, California.
Well, the news continues on Africa Live. We've got a lot more amazing, wonderful, and inspiring stories coming your way, including, let's take a look.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys The greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Canada, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Egypt has announced more than a 4% drop in its literacy rate since 2006. There are about 18.4 million illiterate citizens in the country who represent a great obstacle to development. Cairo has been launching numerous initiatives to continue the progress previously made in literacy programs. Here is Adel El Maroui with more.
2019 is the year of education in Egypt. While the entire country is dedicating its resources and attention to provide better schooling and university systems, literacy is getting no less focus. Since 2006, illiteracy rates dropped from 30 to 25.8%. The number is still staggering.
The rural areas are the main drivers to these high rates. Rural people work mainly in agriculture and crafts, so families feel education is not so useful. That's why it's common in many areas for pupils to abandon school after elementary education. The state, however, has taken massive measures against that trend.
During the past decade, Egypt has seen lower illiteracy rates. They went up, however, with the increase in poverty. While the numbers have grown in recent years, the study shows a significant rise in women's education. This positive trend in literacy also extends to the elder citizens above 65 and the youth.
Illiteracy rates have improved during the last decade. The number appears big because it includes all age categories. But if we dissect it to younger ages, we'll find that it's significantly low. And that's because Egypt worked to maintain that students attend schools.
Many initiatives from the government and NGOs have been made to encourage families to send their children to school.
No initiative, however, has so far been more effective than the urge for poor families to put their children into labor to support the household. Combating illiteracy is among Egypt's top priorities this year. The country needs more creative approaches to speed up the progress it's making. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, it's time for your sports news. We've got your sports right after the break. Don't go away. Let's take a sneak peek at that headline. In sports, South African motor racing team Toyota Gazoo recruit former Formula One champ Fernando Alonso in a bid to retain Dakar title.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout,